Okay, a really warm welcome to you all to this webinar, which is one in a little series that I've been doing recently around topics that are particularly relevant to leaders of all kinds. And this time we're focusing in on female leaders. We are celebrating International Women's Day /week/month/year, and this is our give to you this time round. And so I can see a really lively bunch of fantastic female leaders on the call live. I'm going to be asking for you to participate, because that's what makes a webinar fun for me and for you, so I don't just talk to myself for an hour. And I'm also going to ask you to, as much as you possibly can, switch off from any other distractions that might happen, whether you're joining live or whether you're listening afterwards. So no emails or phones or multitasking, please. This is an hour for you to work on your personal development. It's totally free. It's an opportunity for us to get to know each other better, and for me, hopefully, to provide some useful thoughts and insights for you. So, by way of introduction, my name is Sarah Lloyd-Hughes. I run Ginger Public Speaking, and as many of you know, I am a massive champion of women's voices. I do a lot of work professionally within companies and for individual women to help them to step forward in their vision and in their voice and their visibility. And I am really on a mission, both for myself and for other women, to help us to be more relaxed within our own leadership and more capable of serving others through our voices. And for me, that really means us being more in acceptance with our own particular unique style of leadership. So that is very much what we're up to today. I do like to keep an interactive session, as you know. So if you have any comments to each other or to me as you go through this, let's keep it lively. I will ask for your answers and responses to a few questions and points as we go. And I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as we go as well. So the plan for this next hour is, first of all, a bit of a love letter to women. And I feel like I need to caveat what we're about to do with a big old kiss and an I love you. I am a massive, massive fan of female leadership. I think we have incredible things to contribute to the world. My experience of working with women shows that we are so capable of changing things for the better in the world if we put our minds to it. And that's not to say that the men aren't. I'm not in the business of man bashing, but I really, really love to focus on women, and I think that it's an incredibly important moment at which to do that in history right now. And at the same time, and the reason for this little love letter this morning or this lunchtime, is that we are at a bit of a turning point where we can either truly step into our power, or we can keep kind of bumbling along a little bit. And today I'm going to challenge us by pointing out some of the things that we habitually do that take away from our impact in the world. And you'll see that I'm quite passionate about this and don't think that most of it is quite good enough. Now, this is as much for myself as it is for you. And please know that everything that I'm talking about today, I either have been through myself, investigating for myself, or I am currently going through and trying to work on. Because, you know, we as women, more of us are in more influential positions in the world than we have ever been. And we are right in the thick of transforming the workplace and the global culture from almost a one-dimensional old boys club to an environment that brings balance to the brilliant gentlemen that we can work with, but bringing some of our feminine qualities and capacities, you know, collaboration, beyond personal values, human-centric decision-making. These are things that I see an awful lot. And as I've just said, in order for us to get those qualities and those benefits out to others, to the world, to the work that we do in the world, there are things that we need to do. So my normal style, those of you who work with me or have done in the past, my normal style is to focus on the positive. You know, I know that when we focus on positive things, we relax and we become more of ourselves. And that approach particularly works for women. But today I'm going to take a sidestep from my usual approach and shine a spotlight on some of the habits that we, as a population of women, do to take away our power, not consciously, of course. That's what we're going to focus on today. So the plan is a little bit something like this. We're going to look at my top 10 rundown of undermining habits I see a lot. And I see these a lot all the way from very junior, newbie female leaders into the workplace, all the way through to very senior level women who are finding that something's holding them back and aren't quite sure what it is. We're going to look at where some of these habits come from, and we're going to look at what we would like instead. And I hope that this will be resonant for you. I hope that it will be fun. And I look for each of you to reflect on your own habits and tendencies as we go through each of these top 10 things. And I'll show you a video or so along the way as well. So this is partly how I feel towards my female clients sometimes. We have so many talents, and I constantly see the undermining of those talents. And these 10 things that I'm going to talk you through, I've seen in many different women. And of course, men do this too, a lot of these things that come up, you'll say are non-gender specific, and you'd be right. But I'm actually going to just put the guys aside today and ignore them. You can pass on these ideas to guys if you want. But a lot of these, I think, have something quite closely to do with our socialization as women. Our tendency to be encouraged at a young age to be good, nice, polite, sweet, feminine, and sociable. And on top of that, certainly within the British cultural context, we have additional challenges that might well play a part in a number of these pieces that will come out today. So the habits I'm referring to today, yes, they are stereotyping. I hope you'll forgive me, but stereotypes are useful insofar as they apply to a majority of any population. So some of these top 10 will resonate with you. You can put your hand up and say, absolutely me, and others not so much, in which case that's fine too. I'm not saying that these habits are wrong behaviors, and this is really critical, rather that they can really significantly reduce and undermine our impact in situations where we would like to have more power. And I think really what's critical for my approach is I'm not asking you to change your personality, but I will ask you to reflect on your personal and professional impact that you currently have versus the impact that you'd like to have in certain moments, and ask yourself, how might the gap be bridged? So, are we ready? Let's get on with the top 10. So, tell me when these resonate. The tendency to what I call add the extra icing. Now, what I mean by that is linguistic moderators. Suddenly becoming very aware of my own language. Linguistic moderators are very much like the icing on a cupcake. We use them to try and make ourselves more palatable and sweeter, and to disguise the strength and potency of what we mean. So some of us tell things almost exactly as they are, and others, without realizing, put a lot of icing on pretty much every conversation, every email, every time we share an opinion. Let me give you some examples. Okay, I just think that maybe we should consider. I might need a little bit of help at some point. I have quite a good track record at XYZ. If you resonate with this, then let me know. Let me know in the chat if you are particularly a fan of using these, or if you're just realizing as I say it, oh goodness me, you use a lot of these. Now I'm aware that this is a very British thing to do, so perhaps some of our German counterparts, for example, might be more used to being direct in your language, but I wonder the degree to which this affects women more than men. Chantal says a big fat yes, definitely. And think about the way in which you write emails, for example. Let's go through each of these one by one and see what we could do instead, and have a little look at the different power of each. I'm going to see if I can bring my pen to scribble on this. What happens if instead of saying, I just think that maybe we should consider, we get rid of some of the undermining words. So just is a classic one, which reduces ever so slightly the intensity of what we say. Maybe, where's my little thing here? Maybe is another reducer. I think a lot of, oh goodness me, a lot of guys actually don't say that. They don't say I think, and also consider here. What if instead of having all of that extra fluff, we just said, well, instead of saying I just think that maybe we should consider, if instead we said we should. And I am really, really conscious that I'm constantly saying these little extra bits and pieces. Now, I don't want us to get completely obsessed with every single word we say, but if we notice and have a key moment where we want to influence, consider saying things more simply in a more straightforward manner. Danny, this all depends on the situation. I'm just struggling with my tech just here. Let me find my mouse. So, depends on the situation. Sometimes to come over less direct is important, and I think you're right that we want to make sure that we moderate ourselves for the right situation. Cecile says, I think when you're junior in an organization, you have even more tendency of doing this. Absolutely. I've had to add some of this since moving to the UK, yes, because there is a certain degree of cultural context to this, as I mentioned. Yes, absolutely, it can relate, and I think Natalia is also mentioning this. I think is that Lola? I think it's politically correct ways of communication. So yeah, sometimes we need to be political and sensitive, and other times we can reduce our impact. Have a look and see, are there certain people within situations that use these linguistic moderators versus ones who don't, and who has the more power in different situations. Really interesting point, I think, again from Lola here. If you're more straightforward, you're perceived as aggressive. Now that's a very interesting idea, and I think it's the combination of language with intention, with other signals in your body language. So if you say, we should, and do it in a very aggressive, serious way, in a very pushy way, then I think that aggression could be perceived. If you sit within yourself, and here's where I'm always eager to get us, to sit within ourselves, and instead of almost apologizing for what we have to say, which is what these linguistic moderators do, simply state our opinion, we should, or even I think, then these are the ways that we can start to balance that sensitive piece where you've got somebody who expresses their opinion clearly and they get the credit, versus a lot of ladies who wonder why somebody else is taking credit for their work. Well, if that is what you're wondering, then you might find that this is the case for you. So, Anne has said, I found that I wrote emails that said, can you do this by XYZ? And now I say, please do this by XYZ. Yes, absolutely. This is very good. I might need a little bit of help at some point is not a powerful statement. I need help, or could you help me, please, is a much more direct way of putting it. And so I think what we're really looking for here, and the point that I'm trying to make, is spotting the way in which we undermine ourselves versus spotting the moments where we need to be sensitive to and mindful of the sensitivity of a situation. So I have quite, and there should be there's a spelling error here, quite a good track record at XYZ. How about I have a good track record at XYZ? And this is, again, another question around, which we can come back to later, around the degree to which we as women are willing to boast for or speak up for our own achievements. Okay, let's take all this scribble off. And we'll move to number 9, outing your errors. So this is another indication of low status, and to me it's always a bit of a cringe moment when it happens. When somebody is presenting or speaking or in the position of authority and they give it away by actively pointing out often quite a minor mistake. Let me know if you've done this before. It could be spotting a typo on a PowerPoint slide, and instead of glossing over it for the main point to be made, saying, oh God, I've made a mistake there. I see that as a low status and low authority way of behaving. Now, obviously, I'm not saying here, Lola, we're going to do this all the time, yeah. I'm not saying here to lie. I'm not saying here to manipulate. I'm not saying here that if there is an error in something of substance that we shouldn't spot it and call it out. But this is, again, that little tendency to undermine ourselves. You know, we don't have to be 152% honest. 100% is fine and enough. You know, we often, and I see this a lot in the ladies I work with, feel that to be honest is to say everything and to point out even the silly little mistakes that others might not. I think a real signal that we're stepping into our leadership authority is knowing when it's an important mistake to out and when it just isn't that important. And you can probably tell within your body. Are you pointing it out because you're nervous of the situation versus are you pointing it out because it really is something important? Okay, the next one, the little princess habit. Here's our gorgeous little girl, and who wouldn't want to be such a lovely, sweet and attractive girl? She is an archetype of femininity and youth and splendor, and there's an awful lot of attention on these sorts of ways of being that are affirmed for us growing up. If you look at Frozen as the kind of the idol or the aspiration of so many young girls, it's about little princesses. So this is back to our socialization to be nice girls and good girls and fundamentally girls rather than women. The tendencies here, and again, tell me where this shows up for you or where you see this in other women. Laughing when you express an opinion, totally guilty of that. I really have to struggle to, and Simone's raising her hand, yes, I really have to struggle to pull myself back into being serious in those sorts of moments. Exuberant small talk of, oh, it's such a lovely day, and have you seen the sky outside, and it's so pleasant and it's so splendid, when you're in a room of people who are not necessarily doing that and you're the only one. Excessive smiling. I've seen this a lot in panels where you've got more than one woman or you're the woman on the panel, and I see a lot of that woman smiling and nodding to reinforce other people's points, which is really lovely, but it actually comes across in an undermining or a slightly undermining way to that female leader. Or tilting your head as you talk. Who spots at least one of these within themselves? Please out yourself in the chat. It can be really uncomfortable, I think, to notice in oneself, but I certainly know that it's tricky for me. For me, my natural state of leadership is exuberant and uplifting and smiley, and I can absolutely use that in certain situations where the energy needs to be lifted, where I need to use my charisma to engage people. but bear in mind that that lightness in certain situations can seem inexperienced or lacking in substance, or sometimes less capable of achieving a result. Over to Lola. Guilty, especially when I'm with a company where I feel new or about to give negative feedback. So we try and make ourselves nice in order to make that feedback palatable. Danny, Little Princess, I observe more in English culture, less in Central Europe. Anyone agree? My husband's Polish. I know a lot of Polish people, and I would agree from a Polish perspective that they're much better at standing in their power. I don't know, Danny, which part of Central Europe you're from. Actually, Poland's Eastern Europe, but I have a lot of German friends, and I think they're also pretty good at standing in their power as well. Exuberant small talk is one that Anne finds herself doing a lot. Yeah. Okay, next one then. Playing it nice. I love this info image over here, little people pleaser. Do you find yourself playing it nice, pretending to be happy, whatever you're feeling inside? Happy, bored, angry, terrified, depressed, dying inside. All pretty much the same face. Now let's have a look at what that might come out as in reality. Something like this. Well done, Stephen. This is really great. Thank you. It's almost perfect, apart from this one tiny little adjustment. What do you think Stephen is going to receive as feedback given this statement, or most people? What will we receive? Probably we receive that it's almost perfect. And my experience from guys is when they receive feedback that is majority positive, they are more likely to relax and to think, well, great, I did a great job there. There's not that much that I need to do now. When perhaps what this lady was really trying to say is you need to act, because there's this adjustment that needs to be made. So I think there's a difference between when we communicate with guys. I've certainly found that within my training. When we give them a heap of praise, they say, well, great, how fantastic. When we give women the same 99% positive but 1% negative, they really focus hard on the negative. But be aware that if you're communicating to a heavily male-orientated group, that this playing it nice approach may not be the one that actually has a huge degree of success. Let me know if you resonate with that one as well, please. The next one, let's see, we're getting towards the business end now. So these kind of ramp up as I get down to my countdown of number one. Deflecting compliments. How many times in your life has somebody said, oh, that's a great dress, and you say, oh, this old thing, I got it in the sales last season, or it doesn't quite fit me here, or I'm not quite sure about the color. Or more critically for the workplace, have you ever had a situation where somebody says, you know, great work on the Dubai gig, fantastic, and you say, oh, well, it was a team effort, I couldn't have done it without Jamie. You know, this is such a habit of so many of us, that the person receiving that is likely to just say, well, okay, if you didn't do the work, then I'm not going to mentally keep a checklist of your abilities. I know this within my team. You know, I have a really female-dominated team, and I have some guys within my team who are brilliant at taking credit for and receiving compliments. I had to say to my women in the team, you know what, when they do that, and when they both display the value that they've created, and when they accept their compliments, I feel better. I feel more confident in them as members of my team, so I like it. So I now actively encourage my team not only to receive their compliments, but also to toot their own trumpets. And I'm really pleased to say that I get some regular emails from them saying, oh, a little trumpet tooting moment. They have, they felt like they needed permission socially in order to give themselves praise. But once they have been given that permission, they found it much more comfortable. A few comments on the chat here. Lola, for me, this is one of the most confusing parts of communication, so much that I no longer trust compliments. No, not you, not my gorgeous you. I think the best thing we can do with a compliment is to say thank you, and then nothing else. Thank you. We don't need to explain ourselves. We don't need to push it away. We don't need to think, oh, well, now I'm the best dressed person ever, or, oh, well, now I'm the best professional at whatever it is. We just need to say thank you and absorb it somewhere, but not hold on to it by way of ego. Chantal, staying calm and logical when you're faced with forceful or aggressive language is something that I find challenging. Yeah, I get that. Let's come back to that. If you can remind me, let's come back to that towards the end, where we might have time for some more question and answers, and the 3 principles that I'll show you later on around where our leadership should come from. I think we'll get to that as well. But continuing on, I want to show you a little video. The micro-quirks of doom. These are the little things that we do in our bodies that we're not always aware of that can undermine our authority. And here is our UK former Prime Minister, Theresa May. Let me see if I can now do a little bit of jiggery-pokery on the technical stuff and share with you a video. Hold on 2 secs. Okay. I hope that you can hear this as it plays. And what I want for you to do, please, is to just watch the opening introduction of her coming onto stage. It's not her dancing, thankfully. It is actually a moment in Theresa May's career where, as Prime Minister, a brief moment where she was not under pressure. She was polling really well in the opinion polls, and this is the Conservative Party conference. So she is surrounded by, in theory, friends and colleagues. And just look at the impact that she has in this apparently positive situation as she walks on stage. Have a look and see how you feel.
When we came to Birmingham this week.
Okay, so before she starts talking, and you can watch that speech if you like, it's on YouTube, what did you perceive of Theresa May as she was walking in? What did you notice about her body language? And what impact did perhaps some of those micro-quirks have on her authority by way of how you perceived her when you saw her? Please write in the chat some comments. What I saw and felt was, I felt kind of nervous for her and a bit embarrassed as well. Waveathon, Donna says, Waveathon is very hard to take seriously. Absolutely. You know, you're looking at somebody who's kind of dismissing their power, and because the wave came from the wrists rather from the whole body, and because it was sort of from up high, it could be perceived to be really rather patronizing. Laura here is saying, yes, it was embarrassing to watch a little bit. Yeah, and Hazel as well. She looked awkward and embarrassed, and this was the leader of our country. Did anyone notice the sort of weird gesture that she did that looked a little bit like she was flipping us off as she was waiting? Rebecca says she looked uncomfortable, like she'd been told to act like that. Yes, and the music doesn't help, says Cecile. Yeah, she basically, I think, fell foul to the need to look like a sort of presidential style leader when her whole body is saying something that's incongruous from her personality. Chantal says she's uneasy with herself. Yeah, it's a factor that almost all of her body is speaking against her. They're not working together. So there's a lot of micro-quirks, a lot of clues or cues within her body that she's just not that comfortable. If you notice within her throat or within this region here, she kind of pulls in on herself a little bit. And the awkwardness of the whole situation in terms of physical impact really reduce her gravitas. Now notice that when she starts to speak, she actually has quite a low register voice, and so that in itself helps you to see her as somebody who has credibility. But if she had that awkward body language and then on top of it quite a high-pitched or squeaky voice, or those moments where her voice actually cracked during other conference speeches, these are things that take away from our impact. So all in all, with your body, anything that is, we know this, right? Anything that is fidgety, that is uncomfortable, that's from adrenaline rather than from a place of calm and solidity, it has the opportunity to undermine your impact. Anne said she noticed that she's slightly hunched over all the time. She looks like she's being apologetic. Very, very good point. Let me see if I can switch back now to our PowerPoint. And I think that's exactly right, that there are many different indicators that she isn't fully in agreement with herself. So I always say this is like our degree to feel like a rock within ourselves. When we say that somebody has gravitas, the word gravitas has a strong and obvious connection to the word gravity. And are we weighted within our body? Does our body ground itself effectively? If you think of historic leaders like Churchill, who would definitely seem to have gravitas, you know, he was called the bulldog. That's an orientation towards the lower body, towards the ground. And everything for people who have gravitas is a little bit slower. It's a little bit more measured. It has authority behind it. Whereas this whole array of quirks for poor old Theresa May just looked uncomfortable. My theory for Theresa May is if I'd ever had the chance to work with her, or if I ever do, I'll give her a big cuddle, you know, big cuddle. I'll tell her how brilliant she is and invite her to stop pretending or trying to be somebody that she's not. And the point at which you accept yourself, really, on a very deep level, is often the point at which a lot of these micro quirks disappear. So I think it's really interesting to spot for yourself. When adrenaline gets into your system, when you're nervous, when you're under pressure, what sort of little things do you do that might detract from your impact? Can you spot them for yourselves? And if you care to share, I would love to hear. I know for me that historically it was my speed of speaking and really needing to slow down when the adrenal impulse under the spotlight encourages you to speed up. And if I'm even now in a situation where I'm uncomfortable, and typically that's where I perceive myself as lower in power than someone else in the room, that's what I'll do. I'll start talking too fast, and I'll try to over-please in my way of being. And then I feel awkward, I feel hot, I can find myself mumbling and fumbling, and it's a little bit of a spiral because that person then notices and you have a tendency then to do more of that. Emily apologizes too much. Oh, I'm sorry, Emily. Speed of speaking for Lola. Yeah, Anne is natural inclination is to apologize for the spelling mistake above. And very prone to speaking too quickly, especially when under pressure. Yeah, I think speaking too quickly is a major piece that we can rectify quite quickly if we're mindful of it. And wow, it has so much impact on our ability to be perceived by others as intelligent, as smart, as people as leaders who have substance. Natalia often ends up running out of breath as she forgets to speak when she's speaking. Yes, forgets to breathe. Yeah, great. Thank you for all of those inputs. Let's keep going. So number 4, over collaborating. So this is the tendency that I see in women. On the one hand, we're brilliant collaborators. I don't want to stop that. I don't want to say that we are wrong for that. But it is possible to over collaborate by asking, what do you think is the best way forward? Shall we look at the different options? Versus, here's how I see it, or I have a great idea. So I know that most women are our tendency is more towards collaboration. I think more of that is needed within the world. And at the same time, we need to know when to pick up the signals that it's time to stand on our own 2 feet. Because sometimes the collaboration method can be a hiding place for not sticking our heads above the parapet. So if you're one of those who tends to be the operational superpowers, you know, the person behind the front of room leader, the mechanics of it all, the COO type, it's great. It's really great to know that you have that skill, and also challenge yourself to go beyond that. Challenge yourself not to coach others all the time, but sometimes to step forward for yourself. Anne's got another comment on speaking slowly. Now that my brain is melting down in perimenopause, congratulations. I have to speak slowly most of the time to keep track of my words. There are benefits of aging. How fantastic. However, sometimes I can speak quickly because it all clicks. So now I speak fast when everything's going well. That's good. Thank you, Anne. Okay. So over collaborating, let's be mindful of it. It's a balance, but I see a lot of women who are desperate to get greater, let's say, attention, or sometimes even who have been passed over for very senior opportunities, drawing the causality back to this tendency that they have over collaborated rather than knowing when to delineate the benefit that they have brought to a situation. Number 3, we're getting down to the hot end here, over giving. So if we're good people, our mums have probably taught us to be generous, right? And if you give enough presents out in the world, somebody will give one back to you. That's a basic law of karma. And it's a smart way to live, I think. But sometimes it can be a big mistake in business, because giving more doesn't necessarily mean giving more value. It's possible to actually damage our reputation and our effectiveness by overgiving. And let me give you an example. Just imagine if somebody showed up on your doorstep every morning with an amazing, freshly cooked breakfast of your choice, without you asking. For all kinds of reasons, it's actually going to be unhelpful to everybody. So it might be really nice for you to receive that freshly cooked breakfast, or it might be a bit weird, you decide. But just imagine how you perceive that person, the giver of breakfast. Probably you're grateful, at least in the first instance. But at the same time, it being an act of service means that it typically will slightly lower the status of the giver to servant. An aside here, of course, is that we might want to be that kind of leader in the world. So, yeah, I'm very much in favor, as many of you know, of servant leadership. Think Gandhi, think Mother Teresa. But servant leadership tends to be most effective because you are in a high status position and you're giving back. If you're putting yourself in a low status position and giving and then giving and then giving and then giving, and not leaving any space for acknowledgement of that, then this is where the damage starts to happen from overgiving. So if the CEO shows up on your doorstep, cooks you breakfast, wow, what a great thing to have, what a servant leader, what an act of service. But over time, how do you start to feel towards this constant breakfast giver. Let's say they keep coming. It might be really useful given the coronavirus outbreak, but let's say they keep coming, and then one day they don't come. What do you feel towards them in that moment? You think, well, where's my breakfast? You've come to expect something of that person, and actually they have created in you almost an over-entitled beast who doesn't necessarily appreciate the efforts. Same goes for the workplace. We need to understand when to reel back our generosity and when to let other people come to us. And from there, the gifts when we choose to give them and the service when we choose to give it is going to be most valuable. So classically, there's this tendency for female leaders to work really hard and expect a reward when you haven't signaled your value to others. So back to this COO or the support act, the person who can't say no because they're afraid of not being generous enough, waiting to be recognized but not signaling to others that they want recognition. That's what we call tiara syndrome. I've talked about that in other talks. It's the same in public speaking as well. Classically, the speaker who's desperate to give will be the one from whom the audience receive the least, because the best thing we can do in giving is to be really, really mindful of, here is one beautiful present that I choose to give you. I've wrapped it, I've made the most of it, and it is for you, whether that is in speaking or whether that's in career decisions. If we give carefully, we signal the value that we create in that situation, and then both the receiver and us as the giver receive the benefit. Okay, Rebecca, I think this is a comment. Lola, just a minute. Our core business is about giving. Sometimes I think I take it a notch too far. You probably do, and it's about knowing which circumstances in which to give versus where to reel it back so that people value the things that you do give. Rebecca, non-promotable tasks versus value tasks. I've always struggled to find the balance, which has led to me over-giving in non-promotable tasks. By that, Rebecca, I think you mean tasks through which people wouldn't be able to give you a promotion within your career. Is that right? Rather than leaving space for value tasks. We so often do this as women that we think, well, somebody needs to do it, and so I'm going to step in and do it. Often that creates a weird sort of codependency where the thing that needs to happen might not happen. For example, your boss might need to get an extra pair of hands onto the job, but because you're overcompetent, that is prevented from happening. Natalia's just asking some people posting in a different chat channel. If you want everybody to see your chat, you need to post to all panelists and attendees, otherwise you're just sending it directly to me. Okay, number 2 then, rushing, squirrelling, hurrying about. And as you can see from my lovely little character here, there is a tendency of very physically rushing, and many of you have pointed to it already. I like to compare this to the difference in stature. If you go back to school in your mind, the difference in stature between a harried teacher scurrying into the classroom with his or her head down and almost battling off the students versus the head teacher. And in my mind, my head teacher, a woman, was incredibly short but incredibly serene. So she would walk, or she would almost glide through the school. You'd never see her rushing. And to me, this is an incredibly important indication of status. You don't see the queen squirreling around. People around her do, but she, the one who has status, has time to walk down the street, time to shake hands with every single individual that she wants to, and time to spend with a quality encounter. So if we see ourselves more like the head teacher than the teacher, or more like the queen than the assistant, this is an indication of the status of us as professionals, but also the status of our ideas. So if you really care about getting an important message across, like I know many of you do, it makes sense to slow down everything. The amount of words that you're saying, the time that you take to say that, your whole body language, everything not for the sake of yourself and your own ego necessarily, but for the sake of the idea that you're trying to get across. We are all incredibly busy people. We don't need a whole heap of fuss and speed and chaos. What we need is time to consider and pay attention to something. Slow down. How? Lola, you can do it. You can do it. And I think that the answer is practice. And to start off with, it feels absolutely ridiculous, like you're speaking way slower than you imagine is even sensible. But actually, that is what's most in service of others. Okay, we have one more final thing that women, in my experience, do. And this is my biggest bugbear of them all. So this is why it's got the #1 spot. This is undervaluing my achievements. The number of women that I've worked with that have got doctorates from Cambridge, but don't think that that's good enough because they can't talk about football to their male clients, or I've got an MBA from Harvard, or my PhD's in the wrong subject. Like all of these high achieving women, and by the way, you don't need an MBA or a PhD in order to be high achieving. But the degree of value that we place on our own achievements, I think, is massively undervalued, and the ability to signal that value is even worse. Let me know if you're guilty of this one, undervaluing your own achievements. Somehow, again, back to our socialization, and Simone again, back to our socialization, we think and socially perceive that women boasting is wrong, that somehow it's not ladylike. And at the same time, if we don't know what the other person has achieved, we can't raise them up in our esteem. Sometimes I think, what achievements? And that is exactly the point, that many of you will be saying, oh, I don't undervalue my achievements because I don't have any. Well, sorry, but that's not true at all. And if you ask a colleague or a family member to list your achievements, they may well be better at doing it than you. Natalia says, I think this comes from the fact that women are much more likely than men to suffer from imposter syndrome. May well be. And Arisbe, I do tend to that, particularly when I'm told you're too technical. And again, we're focusing on our negatives rather than our positives. Anne says, I do love the icebreaker where you need to say one thing personal and one professional brag. Yeah, if we can find ways to help each other to boast, then that is a really, really good thing. Isabel says, I don't have time, too busy overanalyzing my mistakes. Yeah. So this is part of the work that I do with women when I work very deeply with them on our program, The Leader's Voice, which is to really, really own our achievements and to get used to saying them out loud. This is what I've achieved. This is why I'm great. And something amazing happens when we're able to claim our achievements. It's not that we have to go on about them all the time, but we settle into ourselves. And I think it's somewhere in the tummy or in the womb, I'm not quite sure, but it's a sense of certainty that contributes to all the other factors that I've mentioned. It helps us to slow down. It helps us to know when to collaborate and when to stand firm in our own ideas. It helps with the micro-quirks, that sense of inner certainty that we have qualities, that we have successes to be proud of. So here's the full list. Which is your favorite undermining habit? Let's just quickly go here before we get to the final part of the webinar. Just give me a number out of 10. Which one was your most common undermining habit? I think mine historically has been number 2 and number 1. I still think that I have some of the extra icing to scrape off my cakes. We've got 1, 4, 10, 9, 5, 3, rushing, that was from Ilka, yes, that's number 2, lots of number 2s, 3, 4, 3, 7, a good spread, 3 and 4. Great that they were resonating, some of them. Okay, So where do all these habits come from? Well, I think we've picked up a lot of that along the way. But I think that there are some fundamental self-talk mechanisms that are going on for most of us. There is a strong difference between the way that most of us behave versus some of these ladies on the picture that you'll see in front of you. These are ladies I consider as having gravitas and presence, but not necessarily being completely faultless, flawless human beings. We've got Michelle Obama, we've got Ruth Davidson, the former Conservative leader in Scotland, Judi Dench, Sheryl Sandberg, and Oprah. And a lot of these ladies are, well, all of them, I'd say, are ones who are incredibly respected, who have that deep sense of certainty in many situations, but also, really interestingly, lean on their vulnerability in certain situations as well, and are comfortable enough in themselves to do that. I've seen all of these ladies be vulnerable publicly in a way that actually signals to the rest of us, look, here are human beings who are leaders. So it's that combination of strength and warmth and vulnerability that I think is brilliant in female leadership and what we're bringing to the fore. So if you need inspiration, I think these are some good ones. What they have all done, I believe, is to find the root of their own personal leadership power. And this is my big investigation in life. How do I find my own root of my leadership power, and how do I help others to do the same? And I've got 3 thoughts for you today, bearing in mind the time. It's just a very, very short set of thoughts around these 3 areas, which another day we can deepen more if you like. The first one is really having a strong sense of knowledge in your why. What are you doing life for? What are you doing business for? Why are you making your decisions? Is it because of your family? Is it because you care about the environment? Is it because you care about progressing things? That's just what you love. Do you love the details and that's what life is all about? What is your particular why that you would fight for and even put your life on the line for? When we know what we're about as human beings, when we know a strong sense of inner calling and inner purpose, we have limitless potency. And all of the things I've mentioned so far today become really minor, really insignificant in comparison. The next piece, and I think this is absolutely critical for things like rushing, holding yourself equal to others. It's also critical for the micro-quirks. If we see ourselves as friends with the other people in the room rather than subordinates, or that they are higher in status than us, or that we are in higher status than them. If we're equal and friends, then we are at our very best. And here, if you think about your very best friends or the people that you're most comfortable with in life, that's the version of you that we want to have out there in all situations. And that comes from, I think, a lifelong study of how can you give yourself permission to be equal to others, even if they have richer clothes than you, even if they have a different personality or a different culture to you. How can you find and maintain your sense of inner equality, that I'm a human being, you're a human being? If we can do that for ourselves, we can do that for others, and that starts to solve a whole load of other problems from society. But first of all, that I think is a root of leadership power. And I think naturally, as a result of these 2, a place of stillness is cultivated within us. So you'll notice, if you're one of those people that resonates with the rushing, you'll notice an inner sense of rushing in a lot of situations. That's, for me, really common. And I can almost feel it like a pendulum, me being swung out of my center and back over time. If we're able to give ourselves that little moment of stillness and calm through which to reconnect with ourselves and our sense of direction, our magnetic north, our our sense of what's right and wrong, that's when, again, we become incredibly powerful human beings and leaders, male or female. And I think if you're able to work on one or more of these things, people around you shift, your behaviors shift, and the impact that you can have in your work dramatically increases. So as I say, just short thoughts for you on that today, but hopefully some inspiration to think about afterwards. Okay, I just want to end today by briefly talking about ginger, and then if we have a little bit of extra time for any further questions or discussions, we can. As I said at the top of this session, genuinely want to give this work to you from the heart, but we are we're in business, and we love to work with amazing companies and amazing human beings who are really congruent with us. So if you have need to continue this work, we have 3 different options. First and foremost, I'd love you to champion us and our women's leadership work within your company. We do some incredible programs for female leaders within tech companies, within law firms, within all manner of different types of organizations, and particularly at that moment where women are stepping up to senior levels of leadership. We always appreciate people championing us in. So I would love you to help us with that, please. And then from a personal perspective, if you'd like to continue the conversation with myself or my team, we have various one-to-one coaching packages, coronavirus proof, that can be done virtually all over the world. And then we also have one-day public courses, a foundational course that runs monthly in London, and one on structure and content as well that's coming up at some point this year, dependent on the big old C. So thank you very much. I can see that people are now needing to wrap up because it's time. But it's been an absolute pleasure having your energy and input online today. Wishing everybody a fantastic weekend. Wishing you all much power and authority in the way that you speak, and fundamentally wishing you choice in the way that you lead as a brilliant, gorgeous human being and female leader. Thanks ever so much, and take care. Bye all.